My friends, let's talk about silence. Not the peaceful kind, not the kind that comes with mutual understanding. I'm talking about the silence that screams. Silence can feel harmless. It can even feel like the safe option when we're caught in an emotional situation, especially one that's complicated or uncomfortable. You might find yourself thinking, if I don't say anything, I won't make it worse. Or maybe it's better not to bring it up. I don't want to hurt him. These thoughts are common and they're easy to justify because silence in the moment often feels like the gentler route. But in reality, silence is never neutral. It always communicates something. And often what it communicates is confusion, distance, or emotional abandonment. When someone doesn't understand why you've withdrawn, why the tone of your messages has shifted, why your energy feels off, or worse, why you've gone completely quiet, they don't just sit there in peaceful acceptance. They go into their own heads. They start analyzing every word, every moment, every interaction. They overthink, they worry, they wonder what they did wrong. They try to fix it without knowing what it even is. Your silence becomes a puzzle they obsess over. And that's where the suffering begins. When you choose not to speak up, the person on the receiving end isn't spared pain. They're forced to interpret your silence. And interpretation is dangerous because it often comes from insecurity, fear, and past trauma. That means he's not just thinking about what's happening now, he's comparing it to every time he was shut out, ghosted, or made to feel unworthy before. And the story he writes in his head, it almost always paints him as the problem. And here's the thing. You may not mean to cause that. Your intention might genuinely be to avoid confrontation or to process your thoughts first. And that's valid. But the emotional impact still exists, regardless of your intention. That's why silence is not neutral, because even when you're doing it to protect yourself or delay discomfort, the other person is still experiencing your absence as a message, even if you're not speaking one out loud. Let's look at it another way. Imagine someone is physically hurt and you see it happen, but instead of helping, you walk away without saying anything. You didn't cause the injury, but your inaction makes the wound worse. Emotional silence works the same way. It doesn't start the pain, but it deepens it. It extends it. It leaves the person alone in their confusion. And don't misunderstand this. Speaking up doesn't mean delivering a final verdict or having all the right words. It means acknowledging what's real. It means saying, something feels off and I need to talk about it. Or, I'm not ready to explain everything yet, but I want you to know where I'm at. That kind of honesty, even in fragments, is powerful. It gives the other person a place to stand. It stops the spiral in their mind. It gives shape to what otherwise feels like emotional freefall. You don't need to have a fully polished speech, but you do need to realize that silence, especially when someone is waiting, hurting, or confused, isn't neutral ground. It's a loud message spoken in absence. And more often than not, that message says, you're not worth the truth. You're not worth the clarity. You don't deserve to know. And if you care about that person, even just as a human being, you don't want that to be the message they walk away with. So when you think you're sparing someone pain by staying quiet, ask yourself, am I really protecting them? Or am I just avoiding the discomfort of an honest conversation? Because silence isn't the absence of harm. It's often just the quietest form of it. There's a fine line between taking on too much emotional responsibility and taking none at all. On one hand, you are not and never will be responsible for how someone else feels at every moment. People have their own emotions, their own triggers, their own internal experiences that you can't control. But on the other hand, you are responsible for your actions, for your choices, for your silence, and most importantly, for the emotional consequences that result directly from what you choose to withhold or express, especially when it affects someone who is emotionally connected to you. It's a balancing act. But here's where people often get it wrong. They assume that because feelings are personal, they don't have to consider how their behavior creates them. They tell themselves, he's responsible for his own emotions. I don't owe him anything, as if that somehow cancels out the very real impact of what you do or don't do. Yes, he's responsible for how he handles his emotions, but that doesn't mean your silence or avoidance plays no part in shaping them. Emotional maturity doesn't mean detaching from how we affect others. It means understanding it with compassion and still acting in alignment with our values. Withdraw without explanation or disappear emotionally, you create a vacuum. And in that vacuum, someone who cares about you starts to fill in the blanks. They're left trying to manage emotions they didn't ask to feel: confusion, anxiety, self-doubt, and all without the basic context that would help them regulate those emotions in a healthy way. And that's not being emotionally independent. That's someone being asked to solve a problem they didn't create with none of the information required to solve it. Does that mean you owe every person a deep emotional debrief just because they want one? No. But it does mean you have to be conscious of the role your silence plays in someone's suffering, especially when they care about you, when there's emotional history, when they've invested time and trust. In those cases, choosing to say nothing is choosing to say something. It says, I'd rather you hurt in confusion than risk the discomfort of me being honest. That's not emotional responsibility. That's emotional avoidance. Being responsible with someone else's emotions doesn't mean carrying the weight of how they feel. It means being honest enough not to make them carry the weight of your silence. It's the difference between saying, I'm not sure how I feel, but I care enough to let you know that, and simply going quiet, hoping the situation will somehow resolve itself. It won't. Silence doesn't heal. It leaves wounds open. You don't have to be perfect with your words. You just have to show up with some courage and a basic sense of accountability. That might sound like, I don't have the full answer right now, but I don't want to leave you wondering. Or, this is hard for me to say, but it feels unfair to keep you in the dark. That is emotional responsibility in action. It's not about having all the answers or taking blame that isn't yours. It's about recognizing that in any relationship, romantic, platonic, or otherwise, your communication patterns directly affect the emotional experience of the other person. And if you genuinely care, or even just want to be someone who acts with integrity, then silence isn't a free pass. It's a choice with real emotional consequences. You're not responsible for fixing someone's heart, but you are responsible for not breaking it by omission. That's the difference between hiding and showing up, between avoidance and maturity, between carelessness and connection. Clarity is one of the most underrated acts of kindness in any kind of relationship. Whether it's a romantic connection, a friendship, or even a professional interaction, the moment you offer someone clarity, you give them something incredibly valuable: the ability to make sense of what's happening and move forward with purpose. It doesn't matter if the clarity is painful. What matters is that it's honest. And in a world where so many people are afraid to say what they mean, where mixed signals are common and emotional avoidance is the default, clarity becomes a rare and powerful gift. Think about what happens in the absence of it. When you're unclear with someone, when you dance around what you really feel, when you avoid saying how things have changed, when you leave questions unanswered, you leave them in a mental fog. They're not just confused. They're stuck. They don't know what direction to go in. Should they hold on? Should they walk away? Should they try harder or stop trying altogether? Without clarity, they can't choose a path. They're forced to live in uncertainty, second-guessing every move, overthinking every word, wondering if they did something wrong or if they're imagining everything. That kind of confusion can be more painful than the truth itself. Because here's the reality: when you care about someone, you owe them honesty. Not brutal, careless honesty, but thoughtful, compassionate honesty. The kind that says, I respect you enough to let you see what's real. That might sound like, my feelings have shifted, or I'm not ready for what you're ready for. Or even, I don't know what I want right now, but I don't want to lead you on. These aren't easy things to say, but they're necessary. They are acts of integrity. They give the other person the dignity of truth. Clarity doesn't just benefit the other person either, it frees you too. When you speak clearly, you stop carrying the burden of pretending. You stop performing. You stop managing someone else's expectations with vague behavior and passive signals. You allow yourself to be seen and known for where you truly are. That honesty is uncomfortable at first, but it's what leads to real connection. Because connection built on guesswork isn't connection at all. It's survival. It's emotional tiptoeing, and nobody feels safe in that. What a lot of people don't realize is that clarity and kindness are not opposites. In fact, clarity is kindness. When you're honest about what you feel, what you want, or even what you don't want, you give someone the information they need to make their own decisions. You give them back their agency. And that is one of the most respectful things you can do for another human being. So many people withhold clarity because they don't want to hurt someone's feelings. But let's be real, confusion hurts more. Wondering where you stand, trying to read between the lines, hoping things will change without knowing where things actually are, that hurts longer, deeper, and in a far more damaging way than hearing the truth up front. Clarity, even when it stings, allows healing to begin. You don't have to have all the right words. You just need to speak with truth and care. Even if it's imperfect, even if it's messy, your willingness to communicate honestly is the difference between keeping someone emotionally stuck and giving them the chance to heal, grow, and move forward. So remember this, your silence may protect you from an awkward moment, but your clarity might protect someone else from weeks or months of emotional suffering. And in the end, that's what real care looks like. Not hiding from discomfort, but choosing honesty because you value their peace as much as your own. There's a common belief that avoiding conflict means keeping the peace. That if we don't bring something up, if we don't express how we truly feel, the situation will somehow resolve itself quietly and painlessly. But the reality is far from that. Avoiding conflict doesn't keep the peace, it keeps everything frozen. It stalls progress. It delays the hard conversations that could bring clarity, understanding, and emotional release. And in the process, it keeps everyone, yourself included, stuck in a place of emotional limbo. Most people avoid conflict because they associate it with negativity. They imagine raised voices, hurt feelings, uncomfortable tension, or relationships breaking apart. So naturally, silence becomes the safer choice. It's less messy. It doesn't require vulnerability. It gives you a sense of control. But here's the problem. Just because you avoid a confrontation doesn't mean the issue disappears. It just goes underground. It simmers. It grows heavier in the spaces between you and the other person. And the longer it goes unaddressed, the more damage it does. Not only to the relationship, but to your own personal growth. Avoiding conflict also means avoiding self-expression. It means denying yourself the right to say, this hurt me, or this isn't working for me, or I need something different. It blocks your voice and keeps you from practicing the emotional muscles that allow relationships to evolve. Conflict, when approached with maturity and care, is not a threat. It's a catalyst. It opens the door to growth, reveals what's working and what isn't. It forces both people to confront reality and decide how to move forward. Many people say they want real relationships. Deep, honest, emotionally safe connections, but they're unwilling to walk through the discomfort it takes to build them. You can't have intimacy without honesty. You can't build trust if no one is telling the truth. And truth almost always involves tension, at least for a moment. And you're not just keeping things calm, you're keeping them stagnant. You're putting your emotions, your needs, and your boundaries on pause. You're also holding the other person in a place where they don't have the opportunity to reflect, adapt, or take responsibility. In other words, you're not just delaying your own growth, you're delaying their growth too. And often, that's where unnecessary suffering begins. A relationship that never faces friction isn't a healthy relationship. It's a fragile one. It only survives as long as nothing goes wrong. The true strength of any connection lies in how both people handle the moments of discomfort, how they communicate when things are hard, how they listen when the truth is messy, and how they show up when it would be easier to walk away or shut down. Growth lives in those uncomfortable conversations. It lives in saying, I'm afraid this might hurt, but I can't keep pretending I'm okay. Or, we need to talk about this because I care about us too much to let it slide. Those moments might feel like conflict, but they're really invitations to deepen understanding, to rebuild trust, to move forward with honesty. So, if you're staying silent to avoid rocking the boat, ask yourself this: is the calm you're preserving real, or is it just a delay? Is the peace you feel rooted in truth, or is it just avoidance dressed up as harmony? Because silence might keep things quiet, but it also keeps you small. And at some point, staying silent costs more than speaking up ever would. Conflict isn't what destroys relationships. Unspoken truth is. And the longer you avoid it, the longer you delay the very growth you say you want. Healing requires understanding. That's the foundation. You can't move on from what you can't make sense of. You can't process pain when you don't even know where it came from. And this is exactly what makes emotional silence so damaging. It doesn't just hurt in the moment. It blocks the other person's ability to heal. Because when someone is left without explanation, without clarity, without even a hint of what went wrong, they're not just hurt, they're lost. Oh, and there's no roadmap for recovery in that kind of confusion. Imagine someone you care about has suddenly become distant. You feel them pulling away, their response is getting shorter, their energy colder. You ask if something's wrong, that the answer is vague. Or worse, you get no answer at all. Eventually, they drift out of your life, and all you're left with is the echo of silence. No closure, no context, just questions. That kind of wound doesn't close easily because it's not just about rejection or loss, it's about not knowing why. And not knowing why becomes a loop in your head you can't stop replaying. He starts asking himself, did I do something wrong? Did I say too much? Was I not enough? Was it something I missed? And the longer those questions go unanswered, the more destructive they become. His self-worth gets tangled up in assumptions. He creates a version of the story that often puts the blame on himself simply because he has nothing else to work with. And that story becomes the emotional scar he carries into the next relationship, the next connection, the next attempt to trust. This is where your silence becomes more than just avoidance. It becomes a barrier to his healing because he can't heal from a blank page. He needs something to process. It doesn't mean you have to spell out every detail or bear the weight of his healing for him. But if you walked away or pulled back or shifted emotionally, and he's still sitting in the wreckage trying to figure out what happened, a little honesty can make a massive difference. I didn't feel emotionally safe, or I realized I wasn't ready for the level of connection we had, or there were things going on with me that had nothing to do with you, but I shut down instead of communicating. That gives him something. It grounds him in truth. It tells him, this isn't all on you. This isn't a mystery you have to torture yourself solving. The point isn't to make yourself a villain or a hero in the story. It's to offer a real narrative he can move forward from, because people don't heal well from assumptions. They heal from truth, even when that truth is hard. So if you've distanced yourself, if you've gone quiet, if you've left someone confused about where they stand, ask yourself, have I given them enough to understand, or have I left them to suffer in a silence I created? Because healing begins with context. And if he meant something to you, if his heart even for a moment was in your hands, then offering him that context isn't just kind, it's necessary. While silence might protect you, it can deeply wound him, because the person on the other side of your silence isn't feeling protected. He's not sitting there thinking, she's probably trying to be gentle with me. More likely, he's stuck in a spiral, wondering what happened, what shifted, and why things suddenly feel so distant. He's trying to solve a puzzle with no pieces. Your silence, which may feel like safety to you, registers as abandonment to him. And that's what's so important to understand. The emotional experience of silence is not the same for the person who chooses it as it is for the person who receives it. You may feel calm, in control, or even relieved. He feels confused, anxious, maybe even discarded. Because from his perspective, your silence doesn't say, I need time. It says, you don't matter enough to deserve a conversation. This isn't to villainize you for needing space. Wanting space is human. Taking time to reflect is healthy, but it becomes harmful when it lacks communication. If you need time, say that. If you're not ready to talk, let that be known. Silence without context doesn't just create distance, it breeds insecurity. And when someone is left alone with their thoughts, their insecurities often fill in the blanks with the worst case scenario. You might think you're doing the right thing by avoiding a confrontation, but silence isn't neutral. It still delivers a message. And too often, that message sounds like rejection, disrespect, or indifference. Those messages stay with people. They leave marks. Because emotional pain caused by confusion doesn't end when the silence does. It lingers. It becomes something they carry into their next experience. More cautious, more guarded, less willing to trust. It's often misunderstood is that silence doesn't prevent harm. It just shifts the burden. Instead of taking on the discomfort of a difficult conversation, you place that emotional load on the other person, forcing them to deal with uncertainty, overthinking, and emotional disorientation alone. In a way, you freed yourself at their expense. That's not how people heal. That's not how respect is built. And it doesn't take a long speech to change that. You don't need a perfect explanation. You just need to acknowledge the other person's emotional experience enough to offer something, some small signal that their feelings are valid, that they're not being dismissed. A simple message like, I'm processing things and not ready to talk yet, but I don't want to leave you in the dark, is powerful. It shows care, it shows maturity, and it still honors your boundaries without causing emotional harm. Silence might feel like protection, but true protection, real emotional safety, comes from honesty, not avoidance. And if you're going to be part of someone's story, even for a little while, ask yourself what kind of mark you want to leave. Confusion and pain, or closure and clarity. Silence may protect your comfort, but speaking, even when it's hard, protects someone else's heart. And that, more than anything, is a reflection of who you are. This isn't just about communication. It's about courage, empathy, and emotional responsibility. It's about recognizing that silence, while often tempting, is not neutral. It has weight. It has impact. And the longer you stay silent, the more someone else is left to carry that weight alone. You don't need perfect words to do the right thing. You just need to care enough to speak, to clarify, to offer a small bridge between what you feel and what the other person is experiencing. Because clarity doesn't cause more pain. It relieves the pain of not knowing. Conflict doesn't destroy connection. Avoidance does. And healing doesn't happen in silence. It begins with truth. So if you've been holding back, ask yourself, is the comfort of your silence worth the cost of their confusion? Is protecting your own peace more important than preserving someone else's dignity? You can't control how someone reacts to your honesty, but you can choose to act with compassion, with integrity, and with enough self-awareness to say what needs to be said, even when it's hard. That's not just emotional maturity, that's kindness, that's closure. That's how you stop the cycle of quiet suffering. Speak, not because you owe an explanation to everyone, but because someone who once trusted you deserves not to be left in the dark. Give the gift of understanding. Be the reason someone can heal with clarity, not spiral in silence. Because the truth is simple. The longer you stay silent, the more he suffers. And if you can help end that suffering with just a few words of honesty, why wouldn't you?